And this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, Disney disappoints, posting its first drop in annual results in nearly a decade. Why the world's largest entertainment company ran out of magic in the fourth quarter. Plus, AT&T and the DOJ prepare for battle. New demands by the Trump administration could derail the $85 billion tie-up with Time Warner. We consider the argument from both sides. And Sean Parker sheds light on the darker side of social media. The Napster co-founder and Facebook founding president tells Axios he's morphed into a conscientious objector. First, to our lead. Disney reporting fourth quarter earnings showing the first drop in annual results since the financial crisis. Profit dropped 1.2% to $1.24 billion. Shares are dipping in after-hours trading. The company suffering from the triple whammy of bad weather hurting theme park tickets, lower ad sales, and a tough year for movies. Disney also reported a $140 million drop in income from investments, citing higher losses at BAMTech, its streaming unit, and Hulu. Joining us from LA is our Bloomberg News reporter, Anusha Sakui, and from New York, Bloomberg TV's editor-at-large, Corey Johnson. So, Corey, what do you think is the biggest takeaway here?
You know, I think that Disney's doing better than a lot of other studios, a lot of other companies here. But the headwinds in the industry and the headwinds of cord cutting, and they're not massive, but it's starting to impact the results across most of their entertainment businesses, whether it's cable or even box office.
So, Anusha, walk us through the various trends. I mean, there were multiple things not working in Disney's favor.
So, they really were hit across the piece, affected by the hurricanes, affected by falling advertising, falling subscribers, even though the affiliate revenue was up, and a poor performance at the box office. And indeed, they said that they were going to take some write down on a movie that they didn't release called Gigantic, so really kind of across the piece they've really been hit on all fronts, and it sort of reminds me of what some analysts have been saying. It'd been in such strong position, but at some point, it was set to snap back, and Bob Iger, the CEO, had to some point sort of flagged this, saying that 2017 would be a sort of anomaly, and it seems that he was right about that. Well, hopefully, if it doesn't continue.
Right. So the question is this really an anomaly, and which of these trends will actually continue? Corey, we can't predict the weather, but of some of these other trends, like what's happening at ESPN, are these long-term things that are just going to keep hurting Disney over the next few quarters?
Well, first of all, to some degree, Disney did predict the weather. The opening of Disney Shanghai, among other things, was meant to isolate them from bad weather in Florida and isolate them from bad weather results in Southern California, and really and in Europe, to diversify their theme park business from some of the effects that include what's going on with the weather. But and that actually worked in this quarter. It would have been a lot worse if it wasn't for China. But ESPN certainly has been a problem, and I think that the programming shuffles at ESPN kind of reflect the issues that they're having there. The Jameel Hill issue around the quarter wasn't sort of a financial impact, but I think it really points to the fact that they're trying to take the ESPN of 20 years ago and make that work today, and they haven't quite figured out what the model is for ESPN today. And the result is they've got this struggling thing that they're throwing a lot of money at in terms of production costs getting higher at ESPN, and that's also on a trailing basis. But the results in terms of growth at ESPN are not showing up.
Anusha, talk to us about the upcoming movie season, and if some of these, movies that are coming out later this year will, dramatically change the box office results.
Disney's in a place that, I haven't seen it for a long while when it comes to movies. It's been ranking third in terms of box office share. It's just climbed up to second. And that's really just not a place that we're used to seeing Disney. Disney, they ended the year well ahead of its peers by market share. And they are expected to end the year in first place when they bring out Star Wars. in December, the Return of the, not the Return of the Jedi, the Last Jedi. You know, the hope is that that will, you know, be a really big movie. And actually the call with Disney is just going on now. And, you know, from the headlines that are coming across the terminal, you can see that they're talking about, you know, more Star Wars films, potentially a new trilogy. But it's also interesting to see what they're sort of saying about the need to invest in new franchises. You know, they really have milked very successfully their Marvel franchises, and you know they're in the process of working through Star Wars. So there is a question of how long their box office success can continue. They have doubled down on big blockbuster movies and making fewer movies than many other studios, but attendance at the box office has been lagging, and people aren't going to the movies as much. So how exposed they will be going in, you know, in the next couple of years will be a question.
Right, Iger saying on the call, no urgent need for new film franchises. Corey, how optimistic are you about this new Disney streaming service? I mean, they've obviously, they've cut ties with Netflix in a number of ways.
Right.
They are, you know, focusing everything on this new streaming service. But when you have competitors like Netflix that, you know, are already very much in this game, you know, how likely is it for such a service coming from Disney to succeed?
Well, I think that the real question is how big a loss is Disney willing to take? I mean, Netflix is a technological marvel, but they have lost billions of dollars in creating that technological marvel. And the question is how much, even if Disney can manage to master that technological feat, how much are they willing to spend to do so? The negative free cash flow that Netflix investors have been willing to tolerate, Disney investors are not willing to tolerate. So what is Disney going to do? Are they at a point where they really think that this kind of service can actually generate positive free cash flow returns, which their investors demand, and Disney would certainly like to have? I think the digital transformation in Hollywood is just as upsetting the business of Hollywood as the way business is done in Hollywood. And just as the casting couch is getting a welcome kick out the door, the old business models of Hollywood at the same time are roiling. You know, if you pick up Hollywood Reporter this week, you're not seeing a discussion about what's happening with the latest box office fabulous success story. You're seeing stories about sexual harassment. You're seeing stories about the shift to digital. You're seeing, and what's really happening is the business model is completely changing in Hollywood, and Disney and everyone else is trying to figure out how to handle that. And I think these things are really important when Disney and other companies are trying to figure out their future. And that's why all this M&A is so interesting here. And if indeed AT&T has to spin out CNN, is that something Disney's going to do? We learned this week that Disney was looking at Fox and looking at their cable networks. Is that something Disney's going to do? Their strong balance sheet also, which stays intact with this quarter, is also something really to pay attention to, because it might tell us what the future of Disney might look, which could be very different.
The call happening now, and Anusha, I know you're going to be listening in for the next hour. What are you listening for?
So, you know, just as Corey was saying there, it's very, you know, obviously, as with yesterday's call with Fox, investors are really trying to figure out what Disney and Fox are thinking with the potential deal that they had been talking about. And just on the call now, I was checking the headlines as I was coming out to do this piece with you, that they're saying Disney's not going to comment on the speculation, and Fox did the same thing right up at the beginning of the call. But you know, it's really unclear what entertainment companies are going to do. And what something that really struck me, and as Corey's alluded to, is that these companies have really, you know, varying visions of what maybe the future brings. Disney is going for this sort of like exclusive, bringing their content back onto their own platforms, whereas Fox, for example, as yesterday was talking about making their content available everywhere and everywhere that's possible. And it's so, you know, Hollywood doesn't know what it's going to do in terms of the future distribution model. That seems what's clear to me, but maybe they have very different visions. And the investments that they've made, that Corey was alluding to in this earnings, they made a loss from, so from BAMTech and Hulu. So it's a lot of uncertainty out there.
So two very different strategies. The time will tell who's on the right and wrong side of history. Anusha Sakui of Bloomberg News, Corey Johnson, our editor-at-large. Thank you both. Coming up, President Trump got a grand welcome in China, but has anything of substance emerged on trade detail between the two superpowers? We will discuss. This is Bloomberg. President Trump just wrapped up his first visit to China as commander-in-chief. And while the visit was big on optics, including his visit to the Forbidden City, critics are arguing that it was short on substance. The two countries announced $253 billion in business deals. However, those are tentative and may not be fulfilled. And although President Trump made China a frequent target on the campaign trail, he sounded a bit different this time around.
Who can blame a country for being able to take advantage of another country for the benefit of its citizens? I give China great credit. But in actuality, I do blame past administrations for allowing this out-of-control trade deficit to take place and to grow.
Joining me now to discuss from Syracuse, New York, Isaac Stonefish, Senior Fellow at the Asia Society Center for U.S.-China Relations. Isaac, how do you think the administration and the president are handling the fact that they didn't get very much out of this trip?
I think that they're trying to send two very different messages. So on the one hand, you had Trump's astonishing comments that you just played about China not to be blamed for the trade deficit, which seems to go against so much of what Trump is saying. And on the other hand, you had a lot of administration officials speaking privately to reporters, talking about this idea that, oh, very soon we're going to be tougher to China and there's going to be really harsh deliverables. And right now, it's just really hard to know what to think.
You know, at the same time as this visit is happening, you see Tencent making a huge investment in Snap, a U.S. social media company, as these social media companies have, had extreme difficulties operating in China, and most of them are blocked. What do you make of that?
I think it just underscores just what you're saying right there, how much easier it is for Chinese investment, Chinese money to come to the United States than it is for American investment to go into China. And I know a lot of tech CEOs and CEOs in general are privately and sometimes even publicly grumbling about the trade barriers that Beijing erects.
At the same time, you're seeing American companies like Apple, for example, taking VPNs down from the App Store. They're making concessions that, maybe they haven't made in the past. What do you make of that?
I think these companies are realizing that a lot of their future growth could be in China, and for them to be global leaders, it really behooves them to have a substantial presence in China. So they are unfortunately making some of the ethical compromises that American customers wouldn't let them make in the States in China.
What's your take on what came out with regards to North Korea during this trip? There had been some hints of progress and then none.
I think Trump was a lot more professional on this trip than he normally has. Admittedly, that's a low bar. But in his speech in South Korea, he did talk about very aggressive reprisals to North Korea without resorting to the kind of bombast, fire and fury like the world has never seen, he said before about North Korea. And at the same time, he left the door open potentially for a meeting, telling a journalist that he'd be open to meeting Kim Jong-un. Not yet, but potentially at some point in the future.
We've seen a lot of unexpected rhetoric between President Trump and North Korea. Where do you think this is going? I mean, what will this actually amount to? Will there be any action more than these words?
One really hopes that the American side and the North Korean side are taking the opportunity of this lag in missile testing. It's been quite a number of weeks since North Korea has tested a missile, and hopefully there are secret conversations that we don't know about that are bringing the sides closer to a deal. I think one thing really to watch out for is, does North Korea decide to test a missile soon? They tend to do less missile tests in the winter, and this could be, particularly this break now could be because of what Trump's doing. It could be just structural reasons inside North Korea, but I think the U.S. response to the next test will be very key.
China didn't seem to offer much when it came to North Korea, and I'm curious, over the last couple of decades, a lot of the discussion with China has been about human rights issues, how the country treats activists. That doesn't even seem to come up when it comes to President Trump. Is that now a thing of the past? So
Trump officials have stressed the importance of human rights in China. It's just Trump himself seemed so overwhelmed and amazed by the red carpet rollout, by the way he was treated in Beijing, that one does find it hard to believe that in a private meeting, he was really talking tough about human rights in China. Officials have privately said that Trump is very supportive of human rights in China, but it's not something he's publicly going to bat for. And frankly, I think sometimes being very public about these things is the way to go. So I don't want to say it's a thing of the past, and perhaps it's just hopeful thinking on my part, but certainly doesn't seem to be a priority for him.
All right, Isaac Stonefish, Senior Fellow at the Asia Society Center for U.S.-China Relations. Thanks so much, Isaac, for joining us. Coming up, internet conglomerate IAC has seen its share price double in the last year. We'll hear from CEO Joey Levin. This is next. IAC's third quarter results beat forecasts thanks to robust growth in its two largest businesses, online dating and home services. But how long can an internet company produce growth stories when the major players in Silicon Valley are eating up all the ad dollars? Bloomberg's Eric Schatzker caught up with IAC CEO Joey Levin for an exclusive conversation at the company's headquarters in New York. Take a listen.
It's a confluence of events. We think about what's best for the company, the sort of subsidiary, what's best for what's left behind, and we have to optimize both of those things. And there has to be a reason to do it. There has to be a value in doing it, and we'll constantly think about that, like we always have. We always will. We're not in the business of empire building. We're not in the business of conglomeration for conglomeration's sake. But I think that there has been value in Match and Angie being part of IAC, and I think that there can continue to be. But we also think about when spins are appropriate and never stop thinking about that.
So about what's left.
Yep.
Why, and this is a question you get as well, why keep publishing? Why keep applications when they are, I'm not saying they're bad businesses, but they're low multiple businesses relative to everything else you do?
Look, I think that we've got to do it one at a time.
Stock price.
Yeah, maybe. I think one at a time. Applications is, I think, a great business. It's been a phenomenal cash flow business for us. It has delivered consistent earnings for us. And I don't think we'll get that same value outside in the market for it. So I don't think anyone will appreciate that value as much as we do. So I'm comfortable sort of collecting what we get from that business. I think in publishing, it took us some time. It was unsellable for some period. I mean, we were just in a bad place in that business for a while. We had a huge restructuring there. We've now got it in a healthy place. And now I think that business is doing well. The growth prospects look healthier than they've ever looked. So I'd like to see how that plays out for a little while.
Okay. This all brings us to an important question, which is, what is IAC? Because some people think of it as being a company it once was, but probably isn't anymore, which is a post-VC incubator.
Yep.
Your businesses are too mature for that.
Yep.
You might have been a growth equity company a couple of years ago, but again, your businesses now, you're sort of in execution mode and to a degree consolidation mode. That's what you've been doing in a number of your markets, including obviously the purchase of Angie's List. So where do you go? I mean, are you going back to post-VC incubation? And if so, shouldn't you be incubating something already?
Yes. On the last question, there are a few businesses that I'd consider in much earlier stages. In many ways, Vimeo is still an incubation project. Dotdash within publishing is still an incubation project. And we're looking at more. I mean, when I look at the market right now, M&A is very expensive, and there is not great opportunities to do some of the things we've done in the past. And so I do think we are going earlier stage. You look at Tinder as a perfect example. Mm-hmm. This is a business that was started in this building or in IAC as a pure incubation.
So what's the next Tinder?
I wish I knew. Look, I don't think we know that right now, but we're in a few categories starting to build, or shortly will start to build, things that we think have that kind of potential.
Can we talk a bit about that, peer into the future? Because the businesses, the technology, let's think of it this way, the technology that's driving the businesses you're in today is getting a little long in the tooth, right? The internet became commercially viable 20 years ago.
Right.
Smartphones are 10 years old already. That's when we saw the first iPhone. So I wonder, and I think a lot of other people wonder, is when you do the next Tinder, let's call it, what's the enabling technology? Because you'd think that it has to be something that's kind of exciting now.
Right.
AI, autonomous driving, VR. Where are you prospecting?
I think about it more simply than that. We're not the VR creators or the AR creators. I think there's other people who are better than that, Facebook, Google. I think we go at a much sort of simpler, more understandable level. And it goes to the kind of fundamental concept of IAC, which is interactivity. There are still categories where interactivity, I mean, we could talk about Home Advisor for a second, where interactivity can be defined or can be changed dramatically for the benefit of both sides of a marketplace.
30 seconds.
All right, that was Joey Levin, IAC Interactive, speaking with Bloomberg's editor-at-large, Eric Schatzker. Well, Amazon is taking its first steps into the British soccer market. Amazon Prime Video will produce a behind-the-scenes series on the current Premier League leader, Manchester City. The series will start airing next year. Amazon's paying Man City more than $13 million for exclusive access. Coming up, the latest in the drama in AT&T's quest to buy Time Warner is the Justice Department standing in the way and why they might have their sights on CNN. This is Bloomberg. Now to a story we are watching the conflicting reports about the state of AT&T's bid to buy Time Warner Cable. Today, AT&T CEO Randall Stephenson tried to clear up some of that, saying the company has not received any pressure from the DOJ to sell CNN, something he's not willing to do to make the deal go through. Take a listen.
We have built an amazing distribution platform. 150 million mobile subscribers, the largest pay TV base in the United States, a huge broadband base. There's a lot of information and data that we think can be used to stand up a new advertising business. Pairing that with the Turner advertising inventory is a really powerful thing, we believe. That is what we aspire to do. Selling CNN makes no sense in that context.
Joining me now to discuss someone very familiar with CNN, John Klein, who was the president of CNN for nearly 6 years. Also with me, Bloomberg Intelligence's Jennifer Rhee, a senior analyst in antitrust litigation. Jennifer, I'll start with you. What has the DOJ actually told AT&T and Time Warner as far as Bloomberg is concerned?
Well, as far as Bloomberg is concerned, I think what has been reported is that the DOJ has been asking for either a divestiture of DirecTV or a divestiture of Turner Broadcasting. Now, Turner, of course, includes CNN, but many other channels as well. And they're doing this because they're concerned about possible harm that could come from having very desirable content combined with very broad distribution. And there might be some ability to leverage both of those positions to harm rivals in either segment.
So, John, despite what Randall Stephenson said, if indeed this is true, do you think this is politically motivated?
Well, who knows? But you do know that the DOJ has laid a giant uncertainty bomb on the markets. It was only 2 days ago that everybody in the M&A space was so excited at these rumors about Disney and 21st Century Fox because they thought the dinner bell had been rung and there were going to be all kinds of consequences as a result. And then this comes and, markets detest uncertainty. And now no one knows whether this is a personal vendetta and are mergers and acquisitions going to be determined by a policy that has a rationale behind it and a philosophy, or is it just going to be about who the president is mad at the moment? And that's what's got to be clarified right now.
So if CNN got spun off, got sold, what would that mean for CNN editorially, given that the strategy for the network has been opposition territory for President Trump?
Well, I think their strategy has been investigate the truth. I mean, that's always been what CNN's been about. I'm no longer there. I no longer have stock, so unfortunately I don't participate in any upside from the acquisition or anything like that. But you know, they are journalists, as you guys are, and they're just pursuing the facts and the information. It depends who buys CNN. You know, if Sinclair bought them, the owners might decide to change the mission of CNN because Sinclair is a very conservative organization. If CBS buys them or Disney buys them to complement their existing broadcast news operations, probably it would be business as usual.
Jennifer, speaking of business as usual, you know, for so many years, massive consolidation has gone unchallenged. Do you see that changing now?
You know, I think it's not so much the massive consolidation that's gone unchallenged, because we actually have seen some fairly big deals in the last few years be challenged by the Federal Trade Commission or the Department of Justice, and actually challenged successfully. But what we're talking about here is a vertical consolidation, and that's quite different from a horizontal merger of competitors, which is removing a competitor from a market and concentrating a market. These are companies that don't compete. They're not removing competition. And honestly, some of the theories of harm as to how competition might get harmed by this combination are very speculative and really depend on what the incentives and the ability of this company are once they're merged to do with their content and with their distribution. So what we're looking at here is a change, a departure from 40 years or more of precedent for vertical deals that either go unchallenged because they're often pro-competitive, or if they do have some harm, that harm is remedied with conditions that are behavioral and not structural, as in selling off a business.
John, you know, say this deal happens, you know, what could you see any sort of conditions being imposed?
Oh, sure. You know, Comcast, which is currently the very thing that AT&T would become if their deal goes through, that is a distributor that owns a lot of very well-received content, is living under a consent decree that involves, I think, 150 different rules. Now, those rules expire in the fall. And part of this may be about the antitrust division of the DOJ anticipating that eventuality and maybe wanting to send a signal that they're going to take seriously these large media combinations. The thing that doesn't really add up is that AT&T divesting itself of the Turner broadcasting properties wouldn't really change its power to do damage in the marketplace. I run now a small startup called Tapp Media. We're a subscription video on demand platform. We're the kind of company that could find itself taking a way back seat if we ever tried to get on some of those AT&T pipes on those mobile phones or what have you. And the real threat to large combinations of mega distributors and mega content is the ability to quash the next Netflix, the next Snapchat. When you think about what the biggest media companies in the world today are, Facebook, Google, Amazon, Netflix, they were all little startups 10 and some odd years ago that could have been killed in the cradle. That would have meant the loss of tens of thousands of jobs and billions of dollars in market value. That's what's at risk. Getting rid of Turner or CNN from AT&T does nothing to address that potential threat.
You mentioned earlier that CNN is simply investigating the truth, and I'm curious, if you were at CNN today, if you were running CNN today, what approach would you be taking to the Trump administration?
The same one, just aggressively holding officials accountable, which was the policy under George W. Bush when I was there and Barack Obama when I was there. You've just, you know, the job of a journalist, you were there, so you know that's what we were trying to do. Just hold officials accountable. Wherever that may land. And it's been amazing business for those who've been doing it. CNN has had a record year or 2 years. You know, the New York Times, the Washington Post, aggressive accountability is great business right now.
I was there indeed. All right, John Klein, you are sticking with me, former head of CNN and Bloomberg Intelligence's Jennifer Rie. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, Snap is continuing to struggle following disappointing third-quarter results. Shares of Snapchat's parent company fell as much as 4% today after Morgan Stanley recommended the equivalent of a sell on the stock. Morgan Stanley was an underwriter of Snap's IPO. Snap has struggled with user growth and ad monetization. It also faces increased competition from Facebook and Instagram. Coming up, Sean Parker, Facebook's founding president, comes out swinging with harsh criticism of the first social network. This is Bloomberg. Twitter is ending its system for verifying user identities. The social media company says the process is, quote, broken. Twitter had a blue check mark to confirm that users had been verified, but was heavily criticized after it placed a check mark on the account of the alleged organizer of the Charlottesville white nationalist rally. Some considered it to be an endorsement or an indicator of importance. Staying with social media, Sean Parker, the founding president of Facebook, said social networks purposely try to consume as much of our attention as possible, and it's potentially hurting our brains. Speaking at an Accel conference, he said, "I don't know if I really understood the consequences at the time. It literally changes your relationship with society, with each other. God only knows what it's doing to our children's brains." Of course, he was president at Facebook. So what does the impact of social validation, this social validation feedback loop from social networks like Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, what does that do to the business of content and, more importantly, future generations? Still with us from New York, John Klein, CEO and founder of Tapp TV, and Bloomberg Tech Sarah Fryer, who covers Facebook and Snap. So, John, I want to start with you. Sean Parker really laying it on thick when it comes to Facebook here, saying that they not only did this purposely, but that he's now a conscientious objector to these tactics and the potential impact of them. What do you make of it?
Biggest humble brag of the month, first of all. Worked in the fact that he was a billionaire a couple of times, worked in the fact that they were so good at what they did that Facebook became what it is. But I think also there's a maturation process that takes place with human beings as well as with companies. And I think you're seeing that as well. You know, you get married, you start to have children, and what was just a headlong rush to an uncertain future filled with success and parties. We all saw that movie, The Social Network. We know what it was like. Suddenly, you realize it's not all fun and games, and that's what Mark Zuckerberg has been dealing with his foundation, and Sean Parker's got his cancer research foundation as well. So they're growing up a little bit, and yeah, maybe feeling a little bad. But I have to say that, you know, at the core of this, what Sean Parker was saying was that Facebook is built upon our narcissism, right? And so if your need for acclaim and your need for likes and shares and all that. So look, if you are hooked on Facebook or other social media, it's really your fault. And maybe it's time to just examine yourself. Parents, of course, have to start doing what parents did when rock and roll came along and when television first came along. They have to know what their kids are doing on social media, and they have to offer limits.
You wonder, though, what it means when it comes to the responsibilities of these companies. Here's a little bit more of what Sean Parker had to say. He said, the inventors, creators, it's me, it's Mark Zuckerberg, it's Kevin Systrom on Instagram, it's all of these people understood this consciously, and we did it anyway. It's a social validation feedback loop, exactly the kind of thing a hacker like myself would come up with because you're exploiting a vulnerability in human psychology. Sarah, can you imagine anyone at Facebook saying, oh, we should try to make sure people don't pay too much attention to this. Let's give them an opportunity to look away.
That's the thing. This is just the foundation of Facebook's business. Of course they want you to spend more time on Facebook. Of course they're optimizing for your attention. I mean, that's the number that they throw out is 50 minutes on average users spend with the Facebook apps on their phones. This is the crux of the business, and Zuckerberg has had some mea culpas this year. Other co-founders of Facebook have had their mea culpas where they come out and say, I'm sorry that our business led to this impact on society. But fundamentally, what Facebook has argued is this is just a human problem that gets blown up on Facebook, right? If their attentions on Facebook, they will be bigger. And that's just what you get when you put a lot of people there.
There's a lot of discussion right now about, the responsibility of these platforms, whether it comes to this, whether it comes to fake news, whether it comes to fake accounts. John, look, as someone who ran CNN, knows what it takes to verify and validate a story. We've seen these companies testifying on Capitol Hill. Where does the responsibility start and where does it stop?
These companies have to take much more responsibility than they initially did, and I think they're beginning to do that, and nobody can sense the way the wind is blowing better than Sean Parker. That's how he got into, Napster and then Facebook and then, Spotify. So he sees that the trend is now to cast more light on the internal practices at these social media companies. And that's right. They have to own more of it, because the last thing anybody wants is for the government to start calling the shots. So again, part of that maturation process for a company is to take ownership of what you've done and start to come to grips with it. They have to,
John,
and they can do more.
Right. What does that look like when we're looking at the volume of content, 2 billion users? I mean, you can lie on TV. You can lie at Thanksgiving dinner. What if you lie on Facebook? What should Facebook do about that?
There's lies and then there's lies, right? There's all kind of gradations. But listen, they're the first ones to brag about how they have the greatest assemblage of geniuses in world history. So, okay, geniuses, figure it out. I'm sure they can. It's not easy. Google's got their best minds on it as well. But this can be done. And they just have to want to. Disclosure, transparency are important. What's their process for vetting? And how on earth did they not even bother to check to see who was buying those ads that turned out to be from the Russians? When they're paying in rubles, that's your first tip. It starts with a will to do something. Self-policing is always about that. Mature corporations understand that. Part of the maturation process, hopefully, these social media companies are going to come to grips with it as well.
Sarah, you were in Washington all week. Remind us where we are when it comes to the changes that these companies are making to their policies and what could be next.
Well, John is right. They're trying to self-police before the government comes in and says, here's what you've got to do. And I would say, to his point, the two things that frustrated the congressional members, as they were interrogating the companies, the two answers that really seemed to frustrate them the most were, one, this content is such a small percentage of the overall content. They're like, we don't care. Find it, fix it. Number two, this is such a hard technical problem. We don't care. You're geniuses. Fix it. Right? And those are like the two big questions, like the things that they really just felt were not a fair representation of how the company should be viewing their responsibility here.
You say you can change the world, now change yourselves.
Right.
All right, Sarah Fryer of Bloomberg Tech, thanks so much. John Klein, CEO of Tapp TV. As always, John, great to have you here on the show.
Thank you.
Coming up, we explore what is driving investments in European technology from the Lisbon Web Summit. This is Bloomberg. In Lisbon, Europe's biggest tech event, has come under. In Lisbon, Europe's biggest tech event has come to a close after attracting 60,000 people over 4 days. This week has seen more than 2,000 startups mingle with investors who are looking for the next big thing. Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow caught up with Accel partners Philippe Botteri at the summit to discuss how Europe is shaping up for VC investors versus opportunities here in the United States.
If you look at the landscape in Europe, I mean, in the past 5 to 7 years, the progress has been really staggering. I mean, a few years ago, people were asking, can Europe generate $1 billion outcome? I mean, Europe has proven that it can generate $10 billion outcome, and we have seen it with gaming company Supercell, with with Spotify, with Zalando. So I think there is no question today that Europe can generate big outcomes. So when we come here and we talk to other investors, we're trying, we understand, discuss the different trends, what we're seeing on the market, and where we think the next wave of innovation is going to come from.
Any concerns about a bubble re-emerging?
Well, I mean, definitely we're in a frothy market, and there is a lot of money chasing growth, and I think it's a market where you have to be selective. But the innovation is such right now that I think this is really a time to look at where innovation is really.
More broadly, is there a mismatch in some cases in different sectors, areas between pre-IPO valuations and what the market is actually willing to pay for a business, especially here in Europe?
Well, I mean, the recent example of IPOs in the US have shown that sometimes the late stage rounds, can be priced at a higher, higher than the, the IPO opening price. But the reality is that, at Accel in venture, we invest very early, so we invest many years before the IPO, so we're not really impacted by that.
Europe versus the US. A lot of talk here has been about European governments, Portugal, Estonia, incentivizing entrepreneurs. How are you seeing Europe grow? What kind of traction is Europe getting compared with the US?
Well, I think if you look at 10 years ago, the innovation in Europe was really happening in in London and Tel Aviv in Israel, and these were the two main hubs. Today, what is really exciting about Europe is like we're seeing innovation around 12 different hubs. I mean, we're seeing Paris, growing pretty fast, Berlin, the Nordics. We're seeing interesting things in in Spain, and now we're starting to see interesting companies like Talkdesk, for example, or Fitzeye, which are originating from Portugal.
That was Accel Partners' Philippe Botteri. Well, Facebook is said to be seeking a new London office. The social media giant is said to be negotiating a new lease to locate a new location close to Google's planned London headquarters. That's according to people with knowledge of the talks. Facebook is looking for at least 400,000 square feet of space at the King's Cross Central Development. Facebook has already signed an agreement to lease a large UK office close to Oxford Street. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. On Friday's show, we'll speak with Alibaba President Mike Evans. Singles Day kicking off in Asia. We'll discuss the crucial 24-hour shopping event. That's all for now. This is Bloomberg.